happening on Wall Street.
Economic indicators.
Who knows where this is going to end up?
To understand the economy, you have to understand human nature.
This podcast is powered by Acast.
How are you doing there? It's David. It is the podcast. You know the drill. And my God, economics is getting weirder and weirder as the time goes on. We've got Bitcoin. We're going to talk about that today. We're going to talk a little bit about maybe housing as well. We're going to actually on Thursday talk about the future of the city because, you know, COVID has done a lot of things, John, but it does make you think about the world. I know you've been watching clouds.
Well, that's what I resort to when I've nothing else to think about.
When you don't have Donald Trump to think about.
Yeah.
By the way, John is actually secretly going mad with no Donald Trump. You know. But we're not doing impeachment. We're not doing it.
I just want to talk about impeachment.
No, tell me about the clouds.
The clouds. Okay. I came across this guy called The Daily Cloud on Twitter. And every day he goes out and he photographs a cloud and he does a little squiggle on it and turns it into an animal or a dragon or something like that. And they're just lovely. They're just lovely.
Look at what COVID is doing to you, my friend. I know. So your week involved looking at clouds.
Well, the one thing I was looking forward to this week that didn't happen properly was the snow. And the reason I wanted the snow was just so I could open the window and look at something different.
And listen, no, I know what you mean. And listen to snow.
Yeah.
Snow's got a lovely sound.
The silence of snow is gorgeous.
It's beautiful. It is beautiful. But I see you're keeping shape.
Yeah.
By the way, the pair of us, it's a kind of pathetic sight, but the pair of us are trying to, it's what we call it for the head and the Ned. We're trying to stay sane in the mornings doing this online course.
But you're doing a lot.
It's neilbowman.ie. I give him a shout out because I find it really good for my head to get up in the morning, do something active just because you're stuck at home, you know?
Yeah.
And which doesn't involve going for a walk in the rain, in the cold. In the rain. Anyway.
What was your week like?
Well, I tell you, I'm down a rabbit hole. I'm investigating the origins of zero, right?
Right.
So I'm in Norman Sicily. There was a Norman rule in Sicily in the 11th century. And the Normans and the Arabs and the Jews and the Byzantine Greeks were all trading in Sicily.
It's quite a crowd.
It is quite a crowd. It's a proper party. You know, it's a big full-on rave. But the interesting thing is the Arabs brought zero to Sicily. But the Arabs borrowed zero from the Hindus, from the Indians. Right? And they borrowed it.
Just the whole concept.
of zero, right?
Yeah.
And they brought this to Europe via Sicily. And there was an Italian monk called Fibonacci. Exactly, who brought it to Florence. So I'm interested in zero. And then when I try, because I'm interested in the origin of mathematics. So
right, okay.
So what happens, John, is the Arabs come out of the desert, like blaze out of the desert, Muhammad, right? About 600 AD. Okay?
Yeah.
And they do a kind of a pincer movement. They go left and right.
Yeah.
They go right, as you look at the map, into Persia and into India in incredibly quick time, right?
Yeah.
And then they go left into North Africa. So you imagine that coming out of the Arabian Gulf, right? And in India, they discover this idea of zero that the West was afraid of. And this is a fascinating idea because what I'm trying to explain is how zero changed the world.
Yeah.
And it's in a chapter I'm trying to work on.
Well, it's a really hard concept to get your head around of nothing.
Well, that's exactly it.
Yeah.
So the reason the Indians, the Jains and the Hindus and the Buddhists, but particularly the Hindus and the Jains, they weren't afraid of what they called the void, of nothingness, of the emptiness, right? Because zero is infinity on the one hand, but it's also empty on the other.
Yeah.
So, and Aristotle and the Greeks were terrified of emptiness because they wanted a world that made sense to them, that man was at the center. Logical, rational man was Greek thought. But if you throw something like the void, emptiness, nothingness in there, you begin to undermine lots and lots of Greek philosophical thought. So the Greeks put a ban on that. And given that the Greeks gave thought to the Romans and the Romans gave it to us through the Holy Roman Empire and all that, zero was something that the West was afraid of. But the Indians, on the other hand, were quite cool with the void because their view was that, man is just a creature.
Yeah.
Like an ant. So we have to deal with it. Yeah. And nothingness is part of looking at the world.
So from a Hindu and Jain perspective, that allowed them to believe in reincarnation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it allowed them to believe in reincarnation, but it also allowed them to make that lovely connection between philosophy and mathematics, that they began to use this concept of zero. They called it chiffre,
Okay.
originally. And it's germane for what we're going to talk about. It's all about the history of money and the
Right.
introduction of zero into monetary affairs, and how that allowed double entry bookkeeping, and how that allowed proper accounting, because you could talk about negatives and positives, and how it actually liberated the merchant to do much more creative accounting. And of course, that goes hand in hand with the evolution of money, because then you've got credits and you've debits, and then you've got long-term lending, and you've got long-term interest rates, and all these sort of things, right?
So that
that's
never existed before.
Never existed before, right?
Right,
Before
okay.
zero. Zero liberated the whole thing. The Romans had concepts of credit, okay, very significant, because as we said, they had big credit busts and booms, but they hadn't got a sophisticated approach to accountancy.
Right.
And Fibonacci came up with a book called Liber Abaci, which is the abacus, the book of numbers.
Right.
And it was all about the role of zero. And this is actually relevant to what we're going to talk about later on, about Bitcoin and numbers and money
Right.
and all
Okay,
that
good
sort of stuff. But the other thing I was looking at was Jain parables and Hindu parables about the world, how to see the world.
Yeah.
Did you ever hear about the 3 blind men and the elephant?
No.
No, this is.
You go ahead and
I'll tell you,
tell me
right?
that.
So this is a way of this is a story about humans don't see the world clearly, and what we tend to see when we're trying to analyze is our own biases. There are 3 blind men in a village, and they hear this commotion. There's an elephant in the village,
Yeah.
but they've never seen an elephant. Okay, so they don't know what an elephant is, but they're asked to go and see this thing. So obviously they go down to the square, the elephant's in the square. And the 3 blind men then try to figure out what the elephant is. So one goes up to the elephant, starts to touch the elephant, and touches the elephant's leg
Yeah.
and says, it's a tree trunk.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then the other one touches the elephant's trunk and thinks, it's a snake, it's a big long snake, right? The other guy touches the elephant's ear, and they think it's some sort of fan, some sort of air thing,
Right.
right?
Sail.
And then, of course, they're moving around. Then he touches the elephant's, what are they
Mickey.
called? Not Mickey. And he says, it's John. He touches the elephant's tusk and he says it's a spear. So the idea is that if you can't see the big picture, you only have a half-assed view of the world, right? So that's the parable of the blind men and the elephant.
Yeah.
That all of us come without a full
Yeah,
picture.
yeah.
And therefore we make silly conclusions about the world simply because you have to wait until you absorb everything.
Yeah.
It's also a parable about willful blindness,
Mm.
that we always, humans will default to whatever prejudice they have, and we will remain blind because we don't want to see.
Yeah.
And I think the debate on Bitcoin is quite like that. So we get on to Bitcoin, the other thing, but you were talking about Amsterdam or something.
I was reading the FT during the week, as I do.
As you do, John. This is
This is the new me.
he's gone from Unpublic to the FT.
But I was really interested in the story about stock trading has moved from London to Amsterdam. And it was the fact that it's 4 times more trading in Amsterdam in January than it was in December.
Yeah, it's a big move. This is
Huge move.
This is Brexit. This is what Brexit actually means, right? So I think the European Union have waltzed the Brits up a kind of cul-de-sac.
Yeah, I was going to say, is this kind of a bit belligerent?
Well, it's not that it's belligerent. There's 2 types of things in economics. Trade.
Yeah.
There's what they call, there's trade and services. So trade in normal goods is like cars, in and out, export, import, right? Then there's trade in services. And services are things like financial services, right? Now, what the Brits were very good at, and have always been very good at, is financial services, right? When I say always, in the last 100 years,
Yeah.
right? The city of London has been dominant. However, the European Union was very, very urgent in getting a trade deal. But what you might have noticed is they're leaving the services deal up in the air. And the reason they are is the European Union runs a trade deficit with the UK, which means it sells more stuff to the UK than it actually buys.
Can I just stop you there?
Yeah.
Was this a deliberate move
Well, I think that
or an oversight on the Brits' part?
it's an oversight in the Brits. See, the Brits got all excited about fish. God knows why, but they did, right? And the European Union said, well, let's waltz them up this fish cul-de-sac, right? Let's talk about trade, right? And this global Britain, we're going to trade and buccaneering and all that sort of nonsense, right? But now they've got the trade deal. What the Brits really need now is a services deal, because Britain is good at services. So Britain has a massive surplus in services with the EU. They sell services. Like the Premier League is a great thing they sell. They sell the Premier League. That's a great example of a service export, right? But the big thing, of course, is the City of London. Now, the European Union has no interest in giving the Brits a services deal. Why? Because they run this, the Brits have a massive surplus, which means the Brits export more of it, which means if you stop them exporting, somebody has to do that business.
Yeah.
And of course, the Dutch, as we know, we've talked about before, have been the kings of finance for the last 500 years. You know, when you think about Holland, you don't think these are the people who invented the stock market. These are the people who invented public liability companies. These are the
bond
people
trading, is it?
who invented bond trading. These are the people who invented money markets. These are the people, if you go back, there is an extraordinary development occurred in Europe. In the 1520s, the Spaniards discovered gold in Mexico, right?
Yeah.
And then they discovered even more gold and silver in Peru. Remember this concept of El Dorado? That the Spaniards wanted to go and find a city of gold, right? They're obsessed by it. So they go into Latin America, they find gold. And of course, the Aztecs were people who used gold for ornaments.
Yeah.
They didn't use it for money. And they couldn't figure out why the hell are these Europeans obsessed with this bloody stuff, right?
Yeah.
And therefore, you know, in all those cases where the Pizarro took the Inca boss guy, kidnapped him, the Incas just gave him loads of gold. They said, well, if they want this shit, we'll give it to them. Anyway, all this gold flows from Latin America into Europe. And interestingly, the gold flows through Spain. Spain should have been the richest country in the world for centuries as a result of this windfall. But what happened, and it's interesting because we're going to talk about liquid digital gold in a bit, right? What happened was the Spaniards gave up working. All the gold came, they said, fuck this, we're not going to work, right?
Really?
So the Spaniards...
That was when the siesta took off.
Siesta takes off, right? So that was really, it's true, right? So the Spaniards say, all the gold comes in, they build all these fantastic buildings, having a complete laugh, right? You know, King Charles mints the whole thing, they've loads and loads of gold. But of course what they do is they spend the stuff. And what they spend it on, so they stop working. It was like, remember Irish people decided, I'm not going to work, I'm going to be a landlord in the boom, right?
Yeah,
Same idea. Easy come, easy go. So the money comes into Spain. Spain should have been the richest country. The Spaniards spend it all. And what do they spend it on? Cloth, textiles, silks, spices, and armaments. And who's making all this stuff? All the textiles are made in the lowlands, the Dutch.
Right.
So the Dutch end up gaining all the money that the Spaniards took off the Indians.
Right.
This is actually what happened. And it went through Spain. So Spain ends up in the 16th century having runs on its currency because they'd blown all the money. They just went on the lash. Okay? This is like a 16th, 17th century of going on the complete skite.
Yeah.
And of course, the parsimonious Calvinist Dutch take all the money.
Yeah.
And then they think, what are we going to do with this? And this is when they begin to invent all these various different ways of trading.
Right, okay.
And so the biggest one was they invented the idea of an equity-based company, right? And that equity-based company ended up being the biggest company in the world, even now, bigger than Google or Apple in its heyday. And it's the Dutch East India Company, which was the biggest company in the world. And what the Dutch said was, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to go out and plunder the Borneo and all these places for spices and cinnamon and all this great stuff, right?
Sorry, when you talk about the size compared to the British East India Company.
Much bigger. Dutch East India Company. Dutch are brilliant with money. We've sold this before, right? Much, much bigger than the British East India, right?
Okay,
so what the Dutch said was, okay, what we're going to do is... Now, there's the 30-year war going on, all sorts of crazy stuff. The Spaniards invaded. The Spaniards then had the lowlands for a while. And the Dutch said, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to become a trading nation. We're going to use Spanish gold to build our navy. Yeah. Also, the Dutch figured out is you don't have to produce stuff to get rich.
Yes.
You just have to trade it.
Yeah.
They go out, they have the biggest navy in the world. In the world, the Dutch have. They go out, they figured they have the Cape of Little Node. Yeah, there's Little Node in South Africa, right? Then in Zanzibar. Then they have in Kerala, in South India, right? Then in Ceylon, in Goa, in India. So they have little trading places. Then in Malacca, in Indonesia, what is now, Jakarta, all these places. So they sew up the world in their sort of prominent teeth, skinny way, look of doing the, hoe gaat het met jij meneer? Godverdomme. Because I freaking lived over there, right?
Yeah. Actually, you used to write for a sports paper, didn't you?
I used to write for, there was the Brugge Handelsblad. Right, in football results in Flemish. Anyway, but so they were so amazing at this, right?
Yeah.
They bring all the money back, but what they figured out was that you can create companies with equity. So what they said to all the Dutch merchants is, you guys finance these companies. You guys you have a stake, right? The state-sanctioned finance. So the state says, we will protect you with the military, with the Navy.
Yeah.
You guys put up the capital, right? They created the first ever central bank, 1606, the Vishandelbank
Right.
in Holland, right? Miles ahead. So my point is, it's not surprising that the Dutch are the people that will actually benefit most from Brexit, because they're also the ones that use the tax system.
Yeah.
They're also the ones that we will end up being allied to. So in the big post-Brexit world, Ireland has to figure out who's your allies in this, right?
Yeah.
And there will be an alliance of Ireland, Holland, Denmark, and Sweden. That's going to be the alliance.
Why?
Because they're all, economically, they all look at the world a bit like us, okay?
Yeah.
France is a little bit too dirigiste, a little bit too powerful. Germany won't really ally with anybody. It's going to remain very much the big player, because if you're the big guy, you don't need allies.
Yeah.
So France, Italy, and Spain are likely to go together. And they are likely to want more federalism, more integration, etc., right?
Right.
The Dutch ourselves, the Scandies, have a much more laissez-faire, much less integrated worldview because we've more to lose.
Right.
And of course, the thing that we don't want to lose is tax, and the Dutch the same. So Macron is pushing for centralized taxation system.
Yeah.
And the Dutch, the Danes, the Swedes, and ourselves, and maybe the Finns,
Yeah.
are looking for something different. So it's an interesting alliance.
It is. And actually, the other thing that happened this week as well was Mario Draghi became Prime Minister in Italy.
Super Mario.
And what kind of effect is that going to have then?
Well, that's very interesting because Mario Draghi is one of the greats of backroom politicking. Now, remember, Mario Draghi was a professor of economics in Florence for many years. So for any professors of economics listening to, there is a future. You may well turn around. But he was the one who, there was a terrible central bank head called Trichet.
Yes.
French guy, really stupid man.
Yeah.
Like really dumb.
Was he?
Yeah, like really dumb. Didn't understand the basics of economics. But the way the French...
How did he end up there then?
Because since the Second World War, the French have been depositing, I'm going to use this, their top people in all the international jobs, right? So you have Camdessu, you have Strauss-Kahn in the IMF, you have the World Bank, you have now, of course, Lagarde, you have Trichet. So basically, the Élysée in France, they were creating functionaires. And those functionaires have been unbelievably successful at getting to the top of all the big organizations. So the IMF, the World Bank, the European Commission, Jacques Delors, another good example, the European Central Bank, yada, yada, yada. So it was like a rite of passage.
Yeah.
If you became governor of the Bank of France, which Trichet was, which was a Mickey Mouse job because they had no real currency, because they were just following Germany. The Germans had them by the nads, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so it was a Mickey Mouse, but lots of pomp and ceremony and all that carry on. He then ends up head of the European Central Bank. The only lesson from the Great Depression is that you print money when the shit hits the fan, right? That's the lesson, right? What happened when the shit hits the fan in Europe? Ourselves, fucking the Greeks, la la la. He raised interest rates. He did the opposite.
Yeah.
And that created a massive panic. So Draghi comes in and says, I hear, right? He comes in and what he first is, Draghi says, he faces down the City of London.
Yeah.
People are speculating against the euro. And he says, I will do whatever it takes. What basically, there's a thing in economics, which is you never bet against the Fed. So you never bet against the central bank.
Yeah.
Because the central bank prints the shit.
Yeah,
it always has more of it,
that
right?
makes perfect sense.
So Draghi said to these guys, you want to short the euro? Go ahead. Make my day, okay? He's getting all De Niro. He's getting all De Niro. Capisce? He's Italian. You want to do it? Do it, okay? And he basically said to the market, the great football chant, come and have a go if you think you're hard enough.
Right.
Okay? So, Mario, this is economics as you will never hear discussed, right? But Mario Draghi is an interesting man.
Yeah.
And running in Italy is an interesting job.
It's a tough job, I'd say.
It's a very, very tough job.
Yeah.
And because there's all sorts of factions and there's, well, you have the Northern League, Salvini's crowd. And then, of course, you've Beppe Grillo's crowd, what do they call themselves?
5 star?
The 5 star, right?
Yeah.
And they're all engineering to fill the void, which is where the Christian Democrats disappeared. And of course, Forza Italia, Berlusconi's outfit. And all the while, you have endemic racism against Italy in the German press, saying that it's a basket case and it's useless.
Oh, right,
and
okay.
So they've got to deal, the Italians got to deal with a lot.
Does this spell the end for London? Or
It's a big deal for London. It's not the end of London.
But what can they do to kind of pull all that business
very
back,
little,
as it were?
Very little, because what London managed to do, right, and this is where the Brexiteers, amazingly, because so many finance people were in Brexit, so many lead financiers backed Brexit, right?
Yeah.
What they didn't seem to realise is that they only had the EU's permission to act as a clearinghouse for Euro trades. They only had the EU's permission to act as a fund management base for European pensions. Once that permission goes, all that money disappears. So basically what the Brits were doing was the Brits had actually said, look, we're the best, and they were, we're the best finance, we're the best fund management, etc.
Yeah.
Give us all your pension money, we'll manage it. And we'll take a fee, 1.5%, 2%, it's a lot. When it comes to the pensions of Europe, it's a huge amount.
Sure.
And we'll clear all your trades. And you know what? You should float your companies in London. Why? Because we're more liquid, we've made a professional, all this sort of stuff, right?
Right.
If you stop that, if you say, well, we're not part of the gang anymore, then the gang say, okay, well, why don't we use the Dutch? Why don't we use Frankfurt? Why don't we use Paris? Why don't we use Dublin?
Yeah.
And all this business is fracturing now.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned Dublin, because the Dublin Stock Exchange also had a bounce in the last month.
The Mickey Mouse Stock Exchange.
But still in all, like, there is a bounce from trading moving from London.
There is definitely. So I mean, basically what has happened is the smart money has gone to Amsterdam. And if you look at Holland, the big banks, you know, they've huge financial organizations, huge financial institutions. And remember years ago when I was in that game, going to New Amsterdam, which is a new town they've built where the old port was. And it's all finance, you know, and they've incredibly interesting cooperative banks, they have merchant banks, they have investment banks, all that sort of stuff. So what has happened is the Brexit penalty that's been paid is going to impact profoundly on the City of London. Profoundly.
Yeah.
This is before we talk about COVID.
Is that job losses and...
Yeah, it's just that
an income tax for the
income
government.
tax. Yeah. Look, finance is ephemeral. It's mercurial. It's impossible to put your finger on, and it moves really quickly. Yeah. Remember, we've always said that money follows the path, like water, of least resistance.
Yeah.
So if you put any resistance up to money, it will disappear. It'll follow a different path. And clearly Brexit is resistance because you can't get passported. To be passported means you can't do business in Europe because you're British, right? Your regulations are different. Your rules are different. Your central bank doesn't have any competence anymore over European trades. So I think they're in trouble. And the other thing is, in the history of money, no less than we were talking about zero, is it always innovates. We're going to talk about Bitcoin in a minute. It's an innovation.
Yeah.
It always mutates. It's like a new variant. The new variant is Brexit. So the money mutates in response to that, right?
Yeah.
And the Dutch, as they did in 1606, are benefiting enormously.
Mark, the other story that really grabbed my eye this week was Elon Musk going out and buying 1.5 billion on Bitcoin.
Which confirms the rumor that Tesla is Bitcoin with wheels. But I think
But why is he doing that
would
now?
you like to be a shareholder of Tesla? You buy shares in a car and your man goes and spends it on a crypto. Now think about it. Like fascinating stuff. I mean, Elon Musk has turned into a massive can-do-no-wrong hero for millennials and younger. There's no doubt of that, right?
That's because he smoked a joint on Joe Rogan's show.
Geez, you'd have to smoke a joint on Joe Rogan's show.
Yeah, you would.
Yeah. I don't understand this, but you're really clever. But yeah, he smoked a joint. But the point is, and he's been a disruptor and he's California and all that carry on, right?
Yeah.
And he did originally start PayPal. So like he is a disruptive character. That's what he does, right? Question, the reason this week's important, right? 1.5 billion, okay, on Bitcoin. So suddenly you're thinking, wow. Now, you know what he really did? The most interesting thing is he made Teslas affordable to people with Bitcoin.
What do you mean?
Right. Remember Henry Ford's obsession was, I'm going to make a car
Yeah.
that is so cheap that my workers can buy it.
Yeah.
That was the Henry Ford model, right?
Yeah.
The democratization car, right? He has said, I'm going to build a car that only people who own Bitcoin can afford. That's the truth. No, but if we actually look at things. So also Bank of New York Mellon, oldest bank in the United States, said they are going to accept Bitcoin.
Oh.
Right. So it's a big thing.
Yeah.
Musk said you can buy Teslas with Bitcoin.
Right.
MasterCard has said we're going to look at clearing with Bitcoin. So suddenly, this week has been...
it's coming into the mainstream then.
Well, it seems to be coming into the mainstream. Now, the interesting... Remember we talked about our elephant and our three blind men?
Yes.
Right? You've got to see the totality of this because nothing divides people in economics and finance more than Bitcoin, John. Right?
Yeah.
For its supporters, Bitcoin is digital gold. And it's the beginning of a process of revolution that will change the world. And what they're saying is Bitcoin is digital gold. And the more central banks print money, the more your Mario Draghi's, remember we were talking about him,
Yeah.
print money, the more your Bernanke's print money, the more your Janet Yellen's print money. There's going to be an inflation risk in the dollar, in normal paper currencies. And Bitcoin is a hedge against that. So
Right.
that's what supporters say.
Yeah.
The detractors, and this is why I say it's like Marmite. You either love it or you hate it. The detractors say it's nothing but a digital tulip. Forget your digital gold. It's a digital tulip. So basically what it is,
Going back to
it's
the Dutch.
tulip, back to our friends, the Dutch.
Yeah.
Okay. It's the tulip mania in currency form, right?
Right.
So the people who support Bitcoin say, hold on a second. This is a hedge against inflation. And we think inflation is going to come down because of all the money printing, number one. Number two, we believe that it'll migrate from a speculative asset, which it is now, into a money, right?
Yeah.
And number three, get with the program, guys. We're in a disruptive age, and you mightn't like it, boomers,
Yeah.
right? But shit's going down, okay? That's really it. That's what they're saying. So if you see what happened, what they're basically saying, we are in a fourth industrial revolution kicked off by the emergence of the internet
Yeah.
20 years ago.
Yeah.
Everything's up for grabs. So too is money.
Yeah.
And then there's also a sort of an anti-establishment side of the Bitcoiners. They're particularly in the libertarian side.
Yeah.
They believe it's a revolution against the establishment, that the establishment rules us because they control our currency, which is very true.
Mm-hmm.
Remember Nathan Rothschild's great expression? I care not for the man who controls the military. Give me the man who controls the money, and I control the country. Okay? Because he was saying, I don't care about the army.
Yeah.
Give me the dude who prints the stuff, right? So another part of the Bitcoin story is this millennial anger at the establishment, right? That they're part of a revolutionary movement. So you throw those all into the mix and you've got something fascinating. Then when someone like Elon Musk says, I will not only invest in this, but my cars, which are the shit at the moment in terms of cars, okay?
Yeah.
Says the man who doesn't even have a car, right? Which is ridiculous. Can hardly drive. But you know what I mean? They are all part of this movement. That's the positive side.
Right.
The negative side is the old school finance, who say this is nothing more than a speculative mania.
Mm.
It can't be a money because it doesn't hold its own value, let alone anything else. So
Sure.
it jumps around the place. And the sort of crazy increases we've seen over the last 4 or 5 months are indicative of that this is a speculative mania and you will lose a lot of money by getting involved in it. And of course, the establishment always dislike disruption
Yeah.
and they dislike
course.
change, right?
Yeah.
So my view is go back to our blind men and the elephant. Nobody's seen the big picture because nobody can. So the establishment are just seeing the trunk, are seeing the, you know what, Johnny boy, okay? And the Bitcoiners are only seeing the ear. So everybody is kind of blind because nobody really knows what's going to happen. But, you get these, Lindsay Lohan, who's apparently some star
Yes, I do know Lindsay
in America,
Lohan. Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And she's endorsing it. And
But
people are saying, well, look, if she's endorsing it, there's some people saying, well, that must be right. And then a lot of the traditional people are
paying
saying,
more attention to somebody like Elon Musk rather than Lindsay Lohan. But no, to go back to the question again of why now, was it, when you're talking about MasterCard and Mellon Bank and all this accepting Bitcoin, was that the prompt for Elon Musk or was it vice versa?
I think,
why now?
I don't know. I mean, I always have this question that I ask myself when it comes to technology, anything, something new appears.
Yeah.
I always say, what problem is it solving?
Yeah.
So, for example, what problem is Bitcoin solving?
Yeah.
Is there a problem with money in terms of exchange? Not really.
Yeah. This is like your man's theory of jobs to be done. You know, what job does this do?
What
problem
solve, right? So, is it a speculative asset that in a portfolio might be a part of it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Right? Is it a reaction to an implicit fear of hyperinflation? You could argue yes. You know, you could argue yes that what's happening now with respect to printing of money. Remember, I said the other day that $1 in every 5 that has ever been printed has been printed in the last 12 months.
Yeah.
Right?
It's mad, yeah.
Right. So is it a hedge? True. You know, should you ignore it? Not at all. And I think always when the establishment comes down against something, you might say, well, there's something interesting going on here. However, there is the Eric Lonergan fear that you get into something like this at $48,000. It's a long way down.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Or you take the view, you know what? This is part of a revolution. It's a revolution against established money. Now,
what about all the other Bitcoins?
Ethereum, Litecoin, all these, they're all part of the same game. In fact, Bitcoin, you can argue, is the least impressive of all the coins because at the end of the day, if they're going to be money, they will have to be exchanged.
Yeah.
And Bitcoin is still very, very clunky. It takes a long time, all that sort of stuff. And it's still very much, you know, crims and drug dealers.
Yeah. And Tesla drivers.
And Tesla drivers, exactly, which you can put in the same sort of general thing. But again, you know, my obsession with history is that all new technologies are unbelievably volatile in the beginning in order to reach stability. And all revolutions and innovations have their detractors and their heroes and their fans. And Bitcoin seems to me to be entirely the same. It's just, if you imagine when the Lydians first, there was a river called the Pactolus River in central Anatolia. Do you know this, John?
Yes, do you know what? I actually do.
The Pactolus River, right, was a source of gold for the Lydians. And the Lydians mined it. This is like 700 BC. And they started to actually use it. And amazingly, lots of people said, this is an amazing technology, this money. We can organize our world around this. And then the Greeks started to use it, and the Greeks started to use silver. Okay?
Yeah.
And the Greeks put these trading posts all around the Aegean using silver. This was a revolution, right? And the Romans started using it. And then we were talking about our friends, the Arabs, etc. Even in Sicily, in Norman Sicily, the coin was so unbelievably significant. Why? Because on one side of the coin, they had Arabic numerals. And on the other side of the coin, they had Roman numerals. What they were saying is, anyone can live here. So the coin is a significant signifier of everything. My own sense with respect to Bitcoin is that it will continue and crypto will continue to be part of the financial worldview. And the reason is the following. You cannot stop it. People want to have alternatives. Yeah. If there is a bout of inflation, if there is anything that resembles hyperinflation, then all the Bitcoiners will be completely vindicated because they will have something that is a hedge against inflation. This is the digital gold idea, that it always has its value, right?
So the smart investor should have a little bit of Bitcoin.
Yeah, but it's a little bit at what price? The price is the most important thing. You know, everyone says, Jay, it'd be great to have bought it in 20 quid. When we were talking to our friend, Pete McCormick, it was at
back
20
in
quid.
August,
I know, gobshites, didn't go for it. But, you know, it's all to do, the smart investment is always about price. Yeah. If you buy something expensive, you're condemned to sell it cheaply, right? So you have to think that a lot of things have to go right for Bitcoin to continue this upward ascent.
Yeah.
And things going right for Bitcoin are things going wrong for the world. So Bitcoin is a hedge against Armageddon. Think about it, right?
Yeah.
And the Armageddon that Bitcoin would be the solution to would be a collapse in the value of the dollar. Well, basically the dollar would become the American peso, right? Imagine the American peso. It goes like the Mexican peso, the Argentinian peso, or the real in Brazil. So against that background, you have to be gambling that the world is going to hit some extraordinary volatility and a massive recession and hyperinflation and the late 1920s all over again.
What has Elon Musk seen? Did he see something from
I tell
space
you, man,
that we didn't?
you won't be selling many cars in the Armageddon, my friend. Do you know what I mean? But maybe he's hedged it. Maybe he's thinking Tesla and electric cars are dependent on a massive increase in consumer ability to pay.
Yeah.
So that's a bet on a rosy future. Remember we talked about hedging?
Yeah, yeah.
Bitcoin is a bet in Armageddon. Elon is quids in either way. Now, while I have you there, again, why not use the time when you're locked up to learn economics? Join me on Patreon. Patreon.com/David McWilliams. Let's learn economics together. We have the economics course. Macroeconomics has never been as essential to understand. We have the Ask Mac tutorials every other week. We have Q&A. We've got the reading list. And more importantly, you become part of the community. If you have a question, if you have something that's going on you want to ask me, join me on Patreon. Email in. I will answer your question. But more importantly, it's ad-free. Just you and me and your man across the way.
Hey.
Patreon.com/Dave McWilliams, and let's figure out the world together.